I am Amanda Reed, 32 years old, and I have always lived in my sister Stephanie's shadow. At a fancy dinner celebrating her engagement, Stephanie mockingly introduced me to her wealthy fiancé Jacob and his family as just an admin. When Jacob politely asked what exactly I did, I replied with one word that changed everything. The entire table froze. His parents looked pale. Stephanie was confused. If you have ever been underestimated by family, like this video and subscribe. As I tell you what happened next, comment where you are watching from, and let me know if you have ever had to set the record straight with someone who thought they knew everything about you. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. My sister Stephanie is 3 years older than me, and from the moment she could talk, she commanded attention. Our childhood home in suburban Massachusetts was filled with her laughter, her friends, and later her trophies. Stephanie was beautiful, outgoing, and seemingly perfect in every way. My parents never explicitly favored her, but their eyes always lit up a little brighter when Stephanie entered a room. I still remember my 10th birthday party. My parents had organized a small gathering at our local park with a few of my friends. As we were cutting the cake, Stephanie burst in with news that she had been selected for the regional spelling championship. Within minutes, my birthday became a celebration of her achievement. This pattern repeated throughout our childhood, my moments overshadowed by her accomplishments. In high school, the contrast between us became even more apparent. Stephanie was homecoming queen captain of the debate team and universally popular. I was quiet and studious, preferring the library to social gatherings. I developed a passion for justice and law, early on devouring books about famous court cases, while Stephanie attended parties. My interests were dismissed as boring by my family, who were enchanted by Stephanie's vibrant social life and academic honors. After graduation, our paths diverged further. Stephanie received a partial scholarship to Princeton, where she studied marketing and business. My parents scraped together every spare dollar to help fund her education, beaming with pride at every holiday when she regaled us with stories of prestigious internships and networking events. I took a different route. I enrolled in community college, while working full-time as an administrative assistant at the local courthouse. My parents viewed this as settling, not understanding that I was strategically positioning myself in the legal system while working toward my degree. I learned the inner workings of the court from the ground up, building relationships with judges, attorneys, and court officials. Meanwhile, I studied nights and weekends, eventually transferring to a state university to complete my undergraduate degree in legal studies. Throughout those years, Stephanie's visits home were events. My parents would prepare elaborate meals and invite extended family to hear about her latest achievements. When asked about my life, I would mention my promotion to senior court administrator, or my acceptance to an evening law program. These announcements were typically met with polite nods before the conversation returned to Stephanie's marketing projects for major brands or her luxury vacations with college friends. The pattern continued into our 20s. Stephanie landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm in New York City, quickly climbing the corporate ladder. She dated successful men and lived in a stylish apartment. My life seemed mundane in comparison, working days at the courthouse and attending law school at night. What my family did not see was my growing reputation in the legal community, the mentorship I received from respected judges, or my graduating with honors despite my punishing schedule. By my late 20s, I had passed the bar exam and secured a position as an assistant district attorney. Stephanie sent a congratulatory text but missed my swearing-in ceremony due to a company retreat. My parents attended, but spent much of the reception discussing Stephanie's recent promotion to marketing manager. I had long since stopped seeking their validation, finding satisfaction in my own achievements and the respect of my colleagues. 3 years ago, I was appointed to the federal bench after a distinguished career as a prosecutor. At 32, I was one of the youngest federal judges in the circuit, an achievement that made headlines in legal publications. I called my parents with the news, but they were distracted by preparations for Stephanie's visit. I sent an announcement to the family email list including the date of my investiture ceremony. Only my elderly aunt attended. Stephanie sent flowers with a card signed by her assistant. What surprised me most during these years was discovering that Stephanie was not as confident as she appeared. Occasional comments revealed insecurities about her accomplishments, as though she measured success solely by external validation. Despite her impressive title and salary, she frequently changed companies, always chasing more prestigious positions. Meanwhile, I built a solid reputation for fairness and legal acumen, finding fulfillment in making meaningful contributions to the justice system. 6 months ago, Stephanie called with excitement in her voice. She had met someone special, Jacob Palmer, a third-generation attorney from a well-known Boston family. Their relationship progressed quickly, and within months they were engaged. Stephanie described him as brilliant, handsome, and from the right kind of family. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope for a fresh connection with my sister. Perhaps her relationship with someone in the legal profession would finally create common ground between us. When Stephanie invited me to an engagement celebration dinner with Jacob and his parents, I accepted readily. I looked forward to meeting the man who had captured my sister's heart, and perhaps having someone at family gatherings who understood my world. Little did I know that this dinner would fundamentally change my relationship with my sister and my family forever. The restaurant Stephanie selected for her engagement celebration was exactly what I expected: exclusive, elegant, and clearly designed to impress. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings and original artwork adorned walls covered in silk wallpaper. A pianist played softly in the corner, and waitstaff moved with practiced precision between tables draped in pristine white linen. I arrived 15 minutes early, preferring to be settled before meeting Jacob and his family. The maitre d' led me to a private dining area in the back of the restaurant, where my parents were already seated, looking slightly uncomfortable amidst the opulence. Mom had worn her best dress, a navy blue number she typically reserved for wedding anniversaries, while Dad tugged at the collar of a suit I had not seen since Cousin Jennifer's wedding 3 years ago. Amanda, my mother, rose to greet me, eyes quickly assessing my outfit, a tailored charcoal pantsuit with a simple pearl necklace. "You look professional as always." Her tone carried a hint of disappointment, as though she had hoped I would make more of an effort for the occasion. I had carefully chosen my attire, professional, but not flashy. As a federal judge, I had learned to balance authority with approachability. The pearl necklace had been a gift to myself when I received my appointment to the bench, a small symbol of the achievement that had gone largely uncelebrated by my family. "The suit looks nice," Dad offered, giving me a quick hug. "Stephanie says Jacob's family is quite something. His father is a senior partner at Palmer Whitney and Taft." The nervousness in his voice revealed his awareness of the social dynamics at play. We were about to meet people who moved in circles far above our middle-class background. Before I could respond, Stephanie swept into the room in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her engagement ring caught the light, a diamond so large it bordered on ostentatious. Behind her stood a tall, well-dressed man with thoughtful eyes and a confident smile. "Everyone," Stephanie announced with the flair of a talk show host, "this is Jacob." She looped her arm through his possessively. Jacob stepped forward, shaking hands with my father and giving my mother a polite kiss on the cheek. When he turned to me, I noticed a sharpness in his gaze, an analytical quality that suggested he missed little. "You must be Amanda. Stephanie has told me about you." Stephanie laughed, a sound slightly too loud for the setting. "Not much to tell about Amanda's boring office job, honey. Oh, look, your parents are here." I turned to see an elegant, older couple approaching our table. Thomas Palmer had silver hair and carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to power. His wife Diane moved with graceful precision in an understated but clearly expensive ensemble that spoke of old money and refined taste. Jacob made the introductions, and I noticed immediately that his parents were impeccably polite, asking thoughtful questions of everyone at the table. When Mrs. Palmer inquired about my work, Stephanie quickly intercepted. "Amanda does some administrative work at a company downtown," she said dismissively. "Nothing as exciting as what the rest of us do." "Jacob, Did you tell them about that new client your firm just signed? I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, but maintained my composed expression. Over the years I had developed a protective shell against Stephanie's dismissals. What stung was not her underestimation of my career, but her deliberate attempt to minimize me in front of others. As we settled into our seats, I noticed my chosen position placed me directly across from Jacob. Throughout the appetizer course, I caught him observing the dynamics between Stephanie and me, with subtle interest. When I began to answer Mr. Palmer's question about changes in the downtown area, Stephanie interrupted with an anecdote about a marketing campaign she had developed for a new restaurant chain. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, but said nothing, falling into their lifelong pattern of silent acceptance. "Amanda, what kind of car do you drive?" Stephanie asked suddenly, as our salads arrived. "I was just telling Jacob's parents about your cute little economy sedan. Such a practical choice." Her smile was sweet, but her eyes held a challenge. "It serves its purpose," I replied, evenly unwilling to mention that I had selected the understated vehicle, deliberately preferring to maintain a low profile given my position on the bench. "And your apartment is in that developing area, right? The one they're trying to revitalize." Stephanie continued her tone, suggesting I lived in an undesirable location, rather than the historic district I had carefully selected for its character and proximity to the courthouse. Jacob's father leaned forward. "Some of those revitalized neighborhoods have the most interesting architecture. Which building are you in?" Before I could answer, Stephanie jumped in again. "Oh, it's nothing special. Not like our place in Beacon Hill." She squeezed Jacob's arm possessively. "Jacob's family has the most amazing summer home in Martha's Vineyard. We are spending a month there after the wedding." As the main course arrived, I noticed Jacob watching me, with increasing curiosity. When Stephanie excused herself to visit the ladies' room, he leaned slightly toward me. "Stephanie mentioned you work downtown. Are you near the Federal Complex?" he asked casually. Something in his tone suggested he might know more than he was letting on, but before I could respond, Stephanie returned quickly, steering the conversation back to wedding plans and their upcoming honeymoon in the Maldives. Throughout the meal, wine flowed freely, and with each glass, Stephanie's behavior became more pronounced. Her stories grew louder, her interruptions more frequent, and her need to impress Jacob's parents more obvious. What I found most interesting was the subtle shift in Jacob's parents' demeanor, from polite interest to careful observation. They were assessing not just Stephanie, but the family dynamic as a whole. "My daughter has always been exceptional," my father offered during a brief lull. "First in her class homecoming queen, and now marketing director by 35. We always knew she was destined for great things." I noticed my mother's quick glance in my direction, a rare acknowledgement of the imbalance in their attention. For a moment I thought she might mention my achievements, but instead she simply nodded in agreement with my father. Jacob's mother turned to me with a gentle smile. "And what about you, Amanda? What do you enjoy about your work?" I opened my mouth to provide a carefully vague response, but Stephanie's laugh cut through the air. "Mom, nobody wants to hear about filing systems and answering phones. Trust me, Amanda's work is nothing compared to what the rest of us do." For the first time that evening, I saw a flicker of something cross Jacob's face, a momentary tightening around his eyes that suggested displeasure. His parents exchanged a quick glance, and I realized they were noticing far more than they let on. As dessert was being served, I felt a growing tension at the table. Stephanie had moved beyond subtle jabs to outright dismissal, seemingly unaware of the impression she was creating. Jacob had grown quieter, his attention shifting between Stephanie and me with increasing frequency. I sensed a connection forming that neither Stephanie nor I fully understood yet, a thread of recognition that was about to pull our carefully constructed family narrative apart at the seams. As coffee was served, the conversation shifted toward professional achievements. Mr. Palmer mentioned his firm's recent victory in a complex corporate litigation case, speaking with measured pride about their legal strategy. Mrs. Palmer discussed her work, chairing a prestigious hospital board. My parents contributed stories about their careers in education before retirement, while Jacob described a challenging case he had recently argued. Stephanie seized the opportunity to highlight her recent promotion. "I have just been named marketing director for the entire Northeast region," she announced, her voice carrying to nearby tables. "The youngest director in company history. My team has over 50 people, and we handle accounts worth millions." Her declaration was met with appropriate congratulations from around the table. I offered my sincere compliments, genuinely happy for her professional success, despite our complicated relationship. Mr. Palmer nodded thoughtfully. The business world certainly values innovation and fresh perspectives. Though in my experience every field benefits from skilled professionals who truly understand their domain. He glanced around the table. The legal system, education, healthcare, business, each requires dedication and expertise. His comment seemed designed to equalize the achievements being discussed, a diplomatic acknowledgement that success takes different forms. I appreciated the sentiment, though I remained comfortably silent about my own position. That was when Stephanie made her fatal miscalculation. "Well," she said, with a dismissive wave in my direction, "Amanda's just an admin at some company downtown. Nothing like what the rest of us do." The casual cruelty in her tone silenced the table momentarily. I felt a familiar flush of embarrassment, not for my actual career, but for Stephanie's persistent need to diminish me. Our parents shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent, trapped in decades of established patterns. Mr. Palmer, perhaps sensing my discomfort or simply out of genuine curiosity, turned to me. "What kind of administrative work do you do, Amanda?" "Administration can be the backbone of any organization." His question was respectful, offering me an opportunity to speak for myself. Before I could respond, however, Stephanie interjected again. "Oh, you know, typical office stuff," she said, with exaggerated patience, as though explaining something obvious to a child. "Answering phones, scheduling meetings, filing papers. Important in its way, I suppose, but not exactly challenging. Amanda has always preferred the quiet life, staying behind the scenes." She turned to Jacob with a smile. "Not everyone can handle the pressure of high-stakes careers like ours, honey." I watched a series of emotions cross Jacob's face. Confusion, then dawning comprehension, followed by something that looked remarkably like concern. He glanced at his parents, who maintained perfect poker faces, though I noticed Mrs. Palmer's knuckles whitening around her coffee cup. In that moment, memories flashed through my mind. Stephanie introducing me to her college friends as my sister, who works in an office, my law school graduation dinner, where she dominated the conversation with stories of her promotion, the family Christmas, where news of my first major case as prosecutor was overshadowed by Stephanie's new convertible. Years of similar treatment, of being reduced and diminished, crystallized into perfect clarity. I had always chosen the path of peace, allowing Stephanie's mischaracterizations to stand unchallenged. But sitting across from Jacob, watching his growing discomfort with Stephanie's behavior, I realized that sometimes silence enables harmful patterns. Perhaps the kindest thing, for everyone, was truth. Jacob set down his coffee cup deliberately and turned to face me directly. His eyes held a question, and something told me he already suspected the answer. "What exactly do you do, Amanda?" he asked, his voice cutting through the ambient restaurant noise with quiet authority. The table fell silent. Even the server hovering nearby seemed to pause, sensing the sudden tension. Stephanie wore a confident smirk, clearly expecting my answer to confirm her characterization. My parents looked nervous, perhaps anticipating an uncomfortable confrontation. In that suspended moment, I made my decision. I would not correct Stephanie with anger or elaborate explanation. I would not list my achievements or titles to compete with her. The truth needed only one word. I met Jacob's gaze steadily, and said simply, "Judge." The single word landed in the center of the table like a physical object. Jacob froze his fork, suspended halfway to his mouth. His parents exchanged startled glances. My mother's hand flew to her throat in surprise, Not at the information which she technically knew, but at my public acknowledgement of it. Stephanie's confusion was evident. "What do you mean, judge?" she asked with nervous laughter. "Like you judge baking contests or something." Jacob set down his fork carefully. "You're the Judge Reed?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "Federal District Court, Eastern Division." I nodded, once maintaining my composure, despite the thundering of my heart. Jacob turned to Stephanie, then to his parents. "I argued the Millbrook securities case in her courtroom last month." He looked back at me with newfound respect. "Your ruling on the admissibility of the electronic evidence was masterful. The law review article discussing your decision has been circulating throughout our firm." Stephanie's face underwent a remarkable transformation. Shock, disbelief, and then the dawning horror of recognition. Her cheeks flushed deep red, and she opened her mouth several times without managing to produce words. Jacob's parents recovered quickly, their impeccable social training serving them well. Mrs. Palmer leaned forward with genuine interest. "I serve on the hospital board with Judge Carmichael. He has mentioned you several times, always with the highest regard." Mr. Palmer nodded thoughtfully. "Appointed to the federal bench at 29, if I recall correctly. One of the youngest federal judges in the circuit. Quite an achievement." "I was actually 30, I corrected gently, though the nomination process began earlier. Stephanie found her voice at last. "But you're an administrative assistant," she insisted, though with much less certainty. "You've always worked in administration at the courthouse." "I started as a court administrator while attending law school at night," I explained calmly. "After passing the bar, I served as an assistant district attorney for 5 years before being nominated to the bench. I've been a federal judge for 3 years now." My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Amanda did tell us about her appointment," he said weakly. "We were very proud." "So proud that you skipped her investiture ceremony to attend Stephanie's company dinner," my mother murmured, surprising everyone at the table, including herself. It was perhaps the first time she had publicly acknowledged the family's habitual favoritism. Stephanie pushed her chair back slightly. "Why didn't you ever say anything? All those times I talked about your administrative job, you just sat there." "I told you repeatedly," I replied evenly. "I called when I passed the bar. I sent announcements when I was appointed to the bench. I invited everyone to my investiture ceremony. You sent flowers with a card, signed by your assistant." The memory of that moment, standing in my new chambers surrounded by colleagues celebrating my achievement, holding a generic bouquet with a card signed by someone who had never met me, suddenly felt both painful and strangely liberating. Jacob was watching Stephanie with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, concern mixed with something that looked uncomfortably like reassessment. "You didn't know your sister is a federal judge?" he asked quietly. "Of course I knew she worked in the legal system," Stephanie said defensively. "I just thought. I mean, she never corrected me when I—" Her voice trailed off as she realized there was no way to complete that sentence without admitting she had deliberately misrepresented my career for years. Mr. Palmer broke the awkward silence. "Judge Reed, I believe we have several colleagues in common. Justice Williams speaks very highly of your work on the Brentwood case." As he engaged me in a genuine conversation about recent legal developments, I noticed Stephanie's growing agitation. She excused herself abruptly, nearly knocking over her water glass as she hurried away from the table. Jacob watched her go, hesitated for a moment, then turned back to the conversation. "Your ruling on the Martinez case set an important precedent for digital privacy rights," he commented. "Our firm has cited it in several subsequent cases." His parents joined in asking thoughtful questions about my career path and experiences on the bench. My own parents sat in uncomfortable silence, their expressions a complex mixture of pride and shame. Pride in my accomplishments, shame in their failure to recognize them adequately. As the discussion continued, I felt oddly detached, watching this new reality unfold around me. The truth had been spoken not with resentment or vindication but simply as fact. One word had changed everything. Not just how others saw me, but perhaps how I would navigate my family relationships moving forward. And somewhere in the restaurant, my sister was confronting a truth she had carefully avoided for years. After several minutes of engaging conversation about recent notable cases, I excused myself from the table. The restroom was located down a quiet hallway lined with original artwork. As I approached, I heard muffled sobbing from inside. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door to find Stephanie, leaning against the marble counter mascara, tracking down her cheeks. She looked up at my entrance, her expression hardening. "Are you happy now?" she demanded, gesturing wildly. "You completely hijacked my engagement dinner." I moved to the sink beside her, maintaining a calm exterior despite my racing heart. "That wasn't my intention," I said quietly, reaching for a paper towel. But I wasn't going to lie about my career when directly asked. "You could have corrected me any of the 100 times before tonight," she snapped, snatching the towel from my hand. "Why wait until you could humiliate me in front of Jacob and his parents?" The question struck me as so fundamentally unfair that I nearly laughed. "I have corrected you, Stephanie. Repeatedly. You've chosen not to listen for years." "That's not true," she protested, though her eyes flickered away from mine in the mirror. "When I graduated law school, Dad gave a toast to your promotion at dinner," I reminded her gently. "When I passed the bar, you asked if that meant I could finally get a real job, instead of playing secretary. When I was appointed to the bench, you sent flowers with a card signed by your assistant because you were too busy with a marketing retreat to attend the ceremony." Stephanie's lower lip trembled. "You're making me sound terrible." "I'm stating facts," I replied. "For whatever reason, you've needed to see me as less accomplished than you. I stopped correcting your mischaracterizations years ago because it never made a difference." Her shoulders slumped slightly. "So you just waited for the perfect moment to expose me as a liar to my future husband." Jacob asked me a direct question. I gave an honest answer. I met her gaze steadily. "I have never undermined you, Stephanie. I've celebrated your achievements, attended your events, and supported your career. I simply expected the same courtesy tonight." Stephanie turned away, pressing her hands against the counter. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, her voice cracking. "You've always been the smart one, the one who got perfect grades without trying. Everything comes easily to you." Her words stunned me. "Is that really what you think? That everything has been easy for me?" "Of course it has," she exclaimed. "You breezed through school while I struggled for every A. You remember everything you read. You can debate anyone into a corner. Do you have any idea what it's like competing with that?" "We weren't in competition," I said, genuinely confused. "And nothing about my career path has been easy. I worked full-time while attending night classes. I studied during lunch breaks and on weekends for years." "But you're so naturally brilliant," she insisted. "I've had to work twice as hard for half the recognition in our family." I stared at her, truly bewildered. "Recognition? Mom and Dad have celebrated your every achievement since kindergarten. They've hung your trophies, framed your diplomas, and told everyone about your accomplishments. They barely acknowledged my law school graduation because it conflicted with your company party." Stephanie's expression changed, moving from defensiveness to something more vulnerable. "That's just the external stuff," she said quietly. "They've always admired you more. Why can't you be thoughtful like Amanda? Amanda would have planned ahead. Amanda never gives us trouble. I was the one they worried about, the one they thought needed the extra attention." The revelation struck me like physical blow. All these years I had perceived their focus on Stephanie as preference, while she had interpreted it as concern about her adequacy. We had experienced the same family dynamic from completely opposite perspectives. "I had no idea you felt that way," I admitted. Stephanie wiped at her eyes, smearing her mascara further. "When I met Jacob, I was so excited. He's brilliant and successful, and comes from this amazing family. I thought finally I had found someone who would be impressed with me, not measuring me against my genius sister." "Is that why you've been so dismissive of my career?" You were afraid Jacob would be more impressed with me than with you." She nodded miserably. "His family is all about achievements and intelligence. They value education and professional success above everything. When I found out his mother serves on boards with judges, I panicked. I couldn't bear the thought of being overshadowed at my own engagement dinner. For the first time, I saw clearly how our parents' well-intentioned but imbalanced parenting had affected us both, giving me the impression they favored Stephanie while convincing her she was somehow inadequate compared to me. The realization brought a wave of empathy despite years of hurt. "Stephanie," I said gently, "Jacob chose you. He loves you for who you are, not for some comparison to me or anyone else. But relationships have to be built on honesty." "He's going to break up with me," she whispered, fresh tears welling. "He values honesty above everything, and I've been lying about my own sister." "You haven't been lying about yourself," I pointed out. "Your achievements are real. Your success is genuine. The only falsehood was about me, and that can be corrected." She looked up, vulnerability plain on her face. "Do you hate me for how I've treated you?" The question deserved honest consideration. "I've been hurt," I acknowledged, "many times. But no, I don't hate you. You're my sister. I just want a relationship based on mutual respect." "I do respect you," she said, surprising me. "I always have. That's part of the problem. I respect you so much that it terrifies me." The admission hung between us, a first step toward understanding. I reached out and squeezed her hand briefly. "We should get back before they send a search party." Stephanie nodded quickly, repairing her makeup with practiced efficiency. Before we left the restroom, she turned to me with unusual hesitation. "What do I say to Jacob?" "The truth," I suggested. "That you've struggled with insecurity about our relationship and made poor choices as a result. That you're sorry and want to start fresh." "And will you? Will you help me? Not make things worse?" The question contained a vulnerability I had rarely seen from my confident sister. "I'm not here to punish you, Stephanie. I'm here to celebrate your engagement. Let's focus on that." She nodded gratefully, and we made our way back to the table together. As we approached, I noticed Jacob watching us with a thoughtful expression. When Stephanie took her seat beside him, he placed his hand over hers in a subtle gesture of support. Whatever his thoughts about the evening's revelations, he clearly cared about her feelings. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Stephanie glanced at me before responding. "We needed to clear a few things up. I owe everyone an apology, especially Amanda." My parents looked startled at this unprecedented development. Jacob's parents maintained polite expressions, though I detected genuine interest beneath their social poise. "I haven't been entirely truthful about Amanda's career." Stephanie continued, her voice gaining strength. "The truth is, my sister is a federal judge, and I've been jealous and insecure about her success. I'm sorry for misrepresenting who she is." The simple admission clearly cost her considerable pride. Jacob squeezed her hand, his expression softening. "Thank you for being honest," he said. Then, turning to me, he added, "And thank you, Judge Reed, for your grace in a difficult situation." "Please, it's Amanda tonight," I insisted. "We're here to celebrate your engagement, not my career." Mr. Palmer raised his glass. "To honesty and new beginnings," he proposed. "And to what I suspect will be interesting family gatherings for years to come." The toast broke the tension, allowing conversation to resume with a new, more authentic quality. As coffee and dessert were served, Jacob's parents engaged me in genuine discussion about my work, while Stephanie made visible efforts to show interest in my responses. My own parents remained uncomfortably quiet, processing their role in the dynamic that had culminated in tonight's revelation. My mother caught my eye once, her expression conveying a complex mix of emotions: pride, regret, and a question about forgiveness that would require more than this evening to address. As the dinner drew to a close, Jacob asked Stephanie to step outside with him for a moment. Through the restaurant's front windows, I could see them engaged in serious conversation on the sidewalk, Jacob speaking intently, while Stephanie listened with uncharacteristic stillness. "Your sister loves you very much," Mrs. Palmer observed, following my gaze. "Fear does strange things to people, especially fear of losing someone's good opinion." "She's lucky to have you as family," Mr. Palmer added. "Both of you have impressive careers, but character reveals itself in moments like tonight. You showed remarkable restraint and compassion." Their kindness brought unexpected emotion to my throat. "Stephanie is a genuinely talented marketing executive," I said. "Her accomplishments are real and impressive. I hope tonight doesn't overshadow that." "Different strengths make a family stronger," Mrs. Palmer replied. "Our son clearly cares deeply for your sister. I suspect this evening, difficult as it was, will ultimately strengthen their relationship through honesty." When Jacob and Stephanie returned to the table, a subtle shift had occurred. They remained physically close, but something in their interaction had deepened. Jacob caught my eye briefly, his nod communicating both respect and gratitude. As we gathered our belongings to leave, Stephanie approached me. "Can we have coffee next week?" she asked tentatively. "There's a lot I think we should talk about." "I'd like that," I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. Our goodbye hug felt different from any we had shared in years. Less performance, more genuine connection. As Jacob and I shook hands, he leaned in slightly. "Thank you for handling this with such dignity," he murmured. "It means more than you know." Driving home, I felt oddly lightened. One word, judge, had collapsed a facade maintained for years. The path forward with my family remained uncertain, but for the first time in memory, it would be built on truth rather than comfortable fictions. That foundation, however, rocky, initially offered possibilities that had previously seemed unattainable. The next morning, I awoke to a text from my mother. "Can we talk? Your father and I have been thinking about a lot of things." I replied with an invitation for coffee that weekend, knowing we needed a conversation long overdue. Before I could set my phone down, another message appeared. This one from Jacob. "Thank you again for last night. Stephanie and I had a long talk afterward. She loves you very much, but has struggled with comparison for years. I hope we can all move forward with more understanding." His message surprised me, not just the sentiment but the fact that he had obtained my number and reached out independently. It suggested a thoughtfulness that Stephanie had never mentioned in her descriptions of him. As I prepared for court that morning, reviewing briefs for a complex patent case, my phone rang again. Stephanie's name appeared on the screen, unusual for a weekday morning when she would typically be preparing for work. "Amanda," she began without preamble, her voice hoarse as though she had been crying. "Can I come see you? Today, if possible. I called in sick to work." "I have court until 3, I replied. "But I could meet you at my chambers afterward." "Is that appropriate? Meeting at the courthouse?" The hesitation in her voice revealed how little she knew about my daily life. "Of course. Judges have family visitors occasionally. Just tell security you're here to see me and they'll call up." At 4:15 that afternoon, my assistant knocked on my door. "Your sister is here, Judge Reed." Stephanie entered my chambers with visible trepidation. Her eyes widened as she took in the space. The wall of law books, the heavy wooden desk, the American flag in the corner, and the formal portrait of the Supreme Court justices. "This is where you work?" she asked softly. "Home away from home," I confirmed, gesturing to the sitting area where I typically met with attorneys for informal conferences. Stephanie perched on the edge of a leather chair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Gone was the polished marketing executive from dinner. In her place sat a woman with minimal makeup, casual clothes, and red-rimmed eyes. Jacob and I talked until 3 in the morning. She began twisting her engagement ring nervously. He was upset, not angry exactly, but disappointed that I had deliberately misrepresented you for so long. "And what did you tell him?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "The truth," she said simply. "That I've spent my entire life feeling like I was competing with you. That I've been terrified of being seen as the less successful sister. That I deliberately downplayed your achievements because I was afraid of being overshadowed." She looked up, meeting my gaze directly. He asked me a question that no one has ever asked before. What would happen if you stopped competing with Amanda and started celebrating her instead? The question hung in the air between us, profound in its simplicity. I didn't have an answer, Stephanie admitted. The idea of not seeing us as rivals has never occurred to me. Which is pretty messed up, isn't it? Family dynamics run deep, I observed. We fall into patterns established in childhood and rarely question them as adults. Stephanie nodded. Jacob helped me see how my insecurity has been driving me to chase external validation, bigger titles, more money, prestigious connections. She gestured around my chambers. While you've been doing meaningful work that actually matters. Your work matters too, I countered. Effective marketing helps businesses grow and connects consumers with products they need. Different fields, different contributions. But that's just it, she said with sudden intensity. I've never looked at it that way. I've only seen success as a zero-sum game. If you're winning, I must be losing. Jacob asked me, what would happen if we could both win, just in different arenas? Her insight surprised me. That's a profound shift in perspective. It feels scary, she admitted. If I'm not competing with you, if I'm not trying to prove I'm better, then who am I? What's driving me? The vulnerability in her question touched me deeply. For perhaps the first time, I was seeing past Stephanie's carefully constructed facade to the insecure person beneath. Maybe the better question is, what would you do if you were only competing with yourself? I suggested. If your goal was becoming your best self, rather than outshining someone else. Stephanie considered this. I don't know, she said finally. I've never thought that way. It might be worth exploring, I offered. What truly matters to you about your work? What aspects bring you genuine satisfaction, separate from status or recognition? She was quiet for a long moment. I like solving problems, she said finally. Finding creative ways to communicate complex ideas. Building campaigns that actually connect with people. That sounds fulfilling, I observed, and entirely separate from any comparison to me or anyone else. Jacob said something similar, she acknowledged. He thinks I should consider therapy to work through some of these competitive feelings. She glanced up quickly. What do you think about that? The question represented a seismic shift in our relationship. Stephanie actually seeking my opinion on a personal matter with apparent sincerity. I think it shows wisdom to seek professional support when navigating difficult emotional terrain, I said carefully. Many of my colleagues use therapy to manage the stresses of the bench. There's no shame in seeking help to become healthier. Stephanie nodded slowly. I scheduled an appointment for next week, she admitted. I think I've been using our rivalry to avoid looking at some things in myself. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the tension between us easing into something more contemplative. Our parents called me this morning, Stephanie said eventually. They're pretty upset about last night. Mom was crying, saying she had no idea how much they had hurt you by focusing so much on me. It wasn't deliberate on their part, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. They probably thought I was more self-sufficient, that I needed less overt support. That's exactly what Mom said, Stephanie confirmed. She said you always seemed so capable while I was more demanding of attention. She grimaced. Not exactly flattering to hear, but probably accurate. They did their best, I offered. Parenting doesn't come with a manual for balancing attention between very different children. You're being incredibly understanding about all this, Stephanie observed. I'm not sure I would be so forgiving if the situation were reversed. I considered her observation. It's not about forgiveness so much as moving forward. Holding on to resentment wouldn't serve any purpose. Very judicial of you, she said with a small smile. The first genuine one of our conversation. Occupational hazard, I replied, returning her smile. I spend my days evaluating evidence and seeking fair resolutions. Speaking of which, Stephanie gestured around my chambers again. I can't believe I've never seen where you work. I can't believe I've never asked about your cases or your experiences as a judge. Her voice dropped. I've missed so much of your life. because I was too busy being jealous to be interested. We can change that moving forward, I suggested. If you'd like to. I would? She said with surprising firmness. I want to know my sister, the real person, not the competitor I've imagined. As we talked further, Stephanie asked questions about my work, thoughtful, interested questions about memorable cases, daily challenges, and what I found meaningful about being a judge. For the first time in our adult lives, we were having a genuine conversation about my world, and I found myself sharing insights and experiences I had never expected to discuss with her. In turn, I asked about her marketing work, listening with genuine interest as she described creative campaigns and strategic challenges. Without the lens of competition, I could appreciate her intelligence and professional skill in a new light. When she finally glanced at her watch, we were both surprised to discover 2 hours had passed. I should let you go, she said, rising reluctantly. You probably have important judge things to do. Just reviewing briefs for tomorrow's hearings, I admitted. But they do need attention. At the door to my chambers, Stephanie paused. Can we do this again? Maybe dinner next week? I'd like that, I said sincerely. She hesitated, then stepped forward to hug me. Not the quick perfunctory embrace we typically exchanged at family gatherings, but a real hug, communicating genuine emotion. I'm sorry, she whispered, for years of treating you like a rival instead of a sister, for missing your investiture, for all of it. I know, I replied, simply returning her embrace. We start fresh from here. As I watched her walk toward the elevators, I felt cautiously optimistic about the possibility of building a new relationship with my sister, one based on mutual respect and genuine interest, rather than competition and misunderstanding. The path wouldn't be smooth or straightforward, but for the first time in years it seemed possible. Later that evening, my phone chimed with a text from Jacob. Stephanie told me about your conversation today. Thank you for your compassion and wisdom. Looking forward to getting to know my future sister-in-law better. I smiled at the message, appreciating his involvement in what was clearly a healing process for Stephanie. Perhaps her instincts about him had been right after all. He seemed to be exactly the partner she needed to grow into her best self. The remainder of the dinner unfolded with a new dynamic. Jacob's parents, now aware of my position, engaged me in conversation about recent cases and legal developments. Thomas Palmer mentioned several colleagues we had in common, while Diane expressed interest in having me speak at a charity foundation event they chaired. We host a scholarship fundraiser for first-generation law students each spring, she explained. Having someone who has risen to your position at such a young age would be incredibly inspiring for the recipients. I noticed how carefully Jacob was watching Stephanie throughout these exchanges, not with disapproval, but with thoughtful assessment of how she was handling the situation. For her part, Stephanie made visible efforts to show genuine interest in the conversation about my work, asking questions that revealed her desire to understand this part of my life she had previously ignored. My parents remained noticeably quiet, their expressions, a complex mixture of pride and discomfort. I caught my mother's eye briefly, and the shame I saw there made me realize they were processing their own role in our family's dynamics. As the conversation continued, I found myself deliberately steering topics away from my career, declining the spotlight to help Stephanie recover the evening's original purpose, celebrating her engagement. When Jacob's father asked about a recent high-profile case, I provided a brief response before asking Jacob about his plans for their honeymoon destination. Jacob smiled gratefully at the redirect. We're thinking Bali, he said, covering Stephanie's hand with his. Stephanie has always wanted to see the temples at sunrise. Stephanie has an amazing eye for beauty, I added sincerely. Her Instagram feed from your trip to Croatia last summer was stunning. My sister looked at me with surprise, clearly not expecting me to remember or mention her travel photography. You follow my Instagram? Of course, I replied simply. Your composition is remarkable. I particularly loved the series from the lavender fields. A genuine smile spread across her face. Not the practiced, polished expression she typically wore at family gatherings, but something more authentic. Thank you. I took a photography course last year to improve my techniques. As dessert arrived, I noticed Jacob gently guiding Stephanie away from the table for a private conversation. Through the restaurant's front windows, I could see them engaged in serious discussion on the sidewalk, Jacob speaking intently while Stephanie listened, with uncharacteristic stillness. His expression was serious but kind, his body language supportive rather than accusatory. "Your sister seems to be processing quite a bit tonight," Mrs. Palmer observed following my gaze. "It's been an unexpected evening for everyone," I acknowledged. "Family dynamics can be complicated," she said diplomatically. "Jacob values honesty above almost everything else. It's something his father and I instilled in him from childhood. But he also has an exceptionally compassionate heart." Mr. Palmer nodded in agreement. "Our son sees the best in people even when they aren't at their best. It's what makes him both an excellent attorney and a good man." When Jacob and Stephanie returned to the table, a subtle shift had occurred between them. They remained physically close, his arm around her waist, protectively, but something in their interaction had deepened. Stephanie's eyes were slightly red, but her expression was one of relief rather than distress. As the evening drew to a close, Jacob's parents extended an unexpected invitation. "We host a monthly dinner for colleagues and friends at our home," Mr. Palmer explained. "We would be delighted if you could join us next month, Amanda. The conversation is always stimulating, and I know several of our regular guests would enjoy meeting you." Before I could respond, Stephanie spoke up. "Amanda has an incredible mind," she said, the sincerity in her voice surprising everyone at the table, including herself. "You would love her perspective on legal ethics. She published an article on digital privacy rights that changed how our marketing team approaches consumer data. Her knowledge of my work, and her genuine endorsement, created a moment of stunned silence around the table." Jacob squeezed her hand, his expression conveying both surprise and pride. "I'd be honored to attend," I replied, addressing both the invitation and the unexpected support from my sister. As we gathered our belongings to leave, Stephanie approached me while Jacob helped his mother with her coat. "Can we have coffee next week?" she asked tentatively. "There's a lot I think we should talk about." "I'd like that," I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. Our goodbye hug felt different from any we had shared in years, less performance, more genuine connection. As Jacob and I shook hands, he leaned in slightly. "Thank you for handling this with such dignity," he murmured. "It means more than you know." The next morning, I received separate phone calls from my parents. My father was uncharacteristically emotional. "We had no idea how much we had overlooked your achievements." "Amanda," he said, his voice thick with regret, "your mother and I have been talking all night about how we failed you." "You didn't fail me, Dad," I assured him. "You raised me to be independent and resilient. Those qualities have served me well on the bench." "But we missed so much," he insisted. "Your investiture ceremony. I can't believe we prioritized Stephanie's company dinner over such an important moment in your life." "We can't change the past," I said gently. "But we can move forward with more awareness." My mother's call was equally emotional but more practical. "I want to know everything about your work," she declared. "Every case, every decision. I've been reading about you online and I can't believe how accomplished you are. The Westland decision was yours. They taught that case in the continuing education course I took last year." Her sudden interest was both touching and slightly overwhelming. "How about we start with lunch next week?" I suggested. "We can talk about my current cases then." The calls continued throughout the day. My aunt wanted to know if she could visit my courtroom. My cousin asked if I would speak to her daughter's high school career day about paths to the judiciary. Even my grandmother typically focused exclusively on when I would find a nice man and settle down, called to express belated pride in my professional achievements. The most surprising call came from Jacob. "I hope you don't mind that I got your number from your parents," he began. "I wanted to thank you personally for your grace last night." Stephanie and I talked until dawn about honesty, insecurity, and family dynamics. How is she doing? I asked, genuinely concerned. Processing, he replied thoughtfully. She's embarrassed, of course, but more importantly, she's confronting some deep-seated patterns. She admitted she's always measured her worth by comparing herself to you. That's surprising to hear, I admitted. From my perspective, she was always the golden child. Jacob chuckled softly. You two have been operating from completely opposite perceptions of the same relationship. Stephanie saw you as the brilliant, accomplished sister she could never measure up to intellectually. She convinced herself that diminishing your achievements was the only way to shine in comparison. His insight matched what Stephanie had revealed in the restaurant bathroom. We've never really seen each other clearly, have we? Perhaps now you can start, he suggested. Stephanie loves you deeply, though her insecurity has masked it. She's already looking into therapy to address these competitive patterns. That's a courageous step, I observed. She's stronger than she gives herself credit for, Jacob said, affection evident in his voice. And wiser than she sometimes appears. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with her. His loyalty and understanding impressed me. Despite witnessing Stephanie at her worst, he clearly saw her potential for growth. You're good for her, I told him sincerely. We're good for each other, he corrected gently. And I hope you'll be part of our lives in a new way moving forward. Not as the sister Stephanie competes with, but as the remarkable person you are. After we hung up, I sat in my chambers, contemplating the seismic shifts occurring in my family relationships. One word: judge. Had collapsed a facade maintained for years. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time in memory, it would be built on truth rather than comfortable fictions. That evening, I received a text from Stephanie, meeting with therapist scheduled for Thursday. Coffee on Saturday. I want to hear about your current cases. Really hear about them this time. I smiled as I typed my reply. Saturday works. I'll bring the Clemson brief. It's a fascinating First Amendment issue. Her response came immediately. Looking forward to it. And Amanda, thank you for giving me another chance. As I prepared for court the next morning, I realized that the simple acknowledgement of my professional identity had created space for something I had long stopped hoping for, an authentic relationship with my sister, based on mutual respect and genuine interest rather than competition and misunderstanding. The path wouldn't be smooth or straightforward, but for the first time in years it seemed possible. 3 months after the fateful engagement dinner, I sat across from Stephanie at our now regular Saturday morning coffee meetup. The change in our relationship was still surprising to me, not just the frequency of our contact, but the quality of our interactions. So, the privacy issue in the Henderson case hinges on whether metadata constitutes protected information, she asked, genuinely engaged in my explanation of a pending decision. Exactly, I confirmed, impressed by her grasp of the legal concepts. The precedents are split on whether users have a reasonable expectation of privacy for information they don't directly input but that their devices generate automatically. Stephanie considered this thoughtfully. From a marketing perspective, that metadata is gold. We build entire targeting strategies around it. But I can see the ethical concerns, especially when people don't understand what they're revealing through their digital footprint. These conversations had become a highlight of my week, an opportunity to discuss complex legal issues with someone who brought a different professional perspective. Stephanie's marketing background often provided insights about consumer behavior and communication that added nuance to my thinking about certain cases. More remarkable than our intellectual exchanges was the emotional honesty developing between us. Stephanie had been seeing a therapist, regularly confronting her lifelong patterns of competitive behavior and insecurity. Dr. Winters says, "I used external validation as a substitute for self-worth," she explained during one of our early meetings, constantly seeking approval from others instead of developing my own internal measurements of success. Her willingness to examine these patterns impressed me. It couldn't have been easy to confront decades of established behavior, yet she approached the process with determination and growing self-awareness. For my part, I was learning to be more forthcoming about my achievements, rather than minimizing them to avoid conflict. When I received a prestigious appointment to the Judicial Conference Committee on Court Administration, I shared the news immediately, rather than downplaying its significance. "That's incredible," Amanda Stephanie had exclaimed, with genuine enthusiasm. "National recognition of your administrative expertise. We should celebrate." She organized a small dinner with our parents Jacob and a few close friends. My first experience of family genuinely celebrating my professional accomplishments. Our parents were making their own adjustments, working to balance their attention and interest between us. Mom had become almost comically diligent about knowing my court schedule, sometimes calling with more detailed knowledge of my upcoming cases than my own clerk possessed. "Mom, how did you know about the Perlman hearing?" "It was just added to the docket yesterday," I asked during one such call. "I check the district court calendar online every morning," she admitted. "I've set up Google alerts for your name too. I don't want to miss anything important again." Her overcorrection was both touching and slightly overwhelming, but it came from a place of genuine remorse and desire to change. Dad, meanwhile, had taken to sending thoughtful articles related to my areas of legal interest, often with insightful questions that showed he had actually read and considered the content. The most profound change, however, was in my relationship with Stephanie. The pretense and competition that had characterized our interactions for decades had given way to something more authentic. We still occasionally fell into old patterns, a flash of jealousy from Stephanie, a moment of defensiveness from me, but now we recognized these reactions and addressed them directly. "I noticed I felt envious when Mom kept talking about your interview in the Legal Times," Stephanie admitted during one coffee meeting. "Old habits die hard." But then I remembered what Dr. Winters said about celebrating others' success without diminishing my own value, and the feeling passed. Her honesty invited reciprocity. "I still sometimes expect you to dismiss my work," I confessed. "I catch myself preparing defensively for criticisms that aren't coming anymore." These honest exchanges were healing old wounds and building new understanding between us. We were learning to see each other as allies, rather than competitors, appreciating our different strengths and supporting each other's growth. Jacob and Stephanie's relationship had weathered the revelation and emerged stronger. His unwavering support during her process of self-examination had deepened their connection. When they adjusted their wedding date to accommodate my court schedule, I recognized it as more than a practical decision. It was a symbolic acknowledgement of my importance in their lives. My professional life continued to flourish, with several of my decisions receiving positive attention in legal journals. When a profile in the National Law Review described me as one of the most promising young judges in the federal judiciary, Stephanie was the first to share it proudly on social media. Perhaps the most significant marker of our changing relationship came when Stephanie declined a prestigious marketing position that would have significantly increased her salary and status. "It would have meant 60-hour weeks and constant travel," she explained, when I expressed surprise at her decision. After all this work on understanding what really matters to me, I realized I value my relationships and quality of life more than another impressive title. That's growth, right? Her self-awareness impressed me. Significant growth, I agreed. Knowing what you truly value and making decisions accordingly, that's wisdom many people never achieve. 6 months after the engagement dinner, I faced a challenging decision. A high-profile case in my court involved a company where Jacob's firm was counsel of record, though Jacob himself wasn't directly involved. Proper judicial ethics required I disclose the potential conflict and consider recusal. When I called Stephanie to explain the situation, her response surprised me. "You absolutely need to recuse yourself," she said immediately. "Your integrity is too important to risk even the appearance of impropriety." "It would mean delaying a significant case," I pointed out, "and possibly disappointing the chief judge who specifically assigned it to me." "Amanda," she said firmly, "your reputation for fairness is what makes you an exceptional judge." Jacob said the same thing when I mentioned the possibility that you should definitely recuse yourself, and he would think less of you if you didn't. Her prioritization of my professional ethics over family convenience represented a fundamental shift in how she valued my career. The Stephanie of a year ago might have pressed for the advantage of having her sister preside over a case involving her fiancé's firm. This Stephanie understood and respected the boundaries of my position. I filed the recusal the next morning, feeling confident in the decision, despite the administrative complications it created. The chief judge, far from being disappointed, commended my ethical clarity. 1 year after the engagement dinner, I stood in a beautiful garden watching Stephanie and Jacob exchange vows. As maid of honor, I had helped her plan aspects of the ceremony, another first in our relationship. During the reception, Jacob's father raised a toast that acknowledged the journey our families had taken together. "To new beginnings and hard-earned wisdom," he said, raising his glass. "May we all continue to grow in understanding and appreciation of each other." Later, as Stephanie and I shared a quiet moment before her departure for her honeymoon, she took my hands in hers. "I never thought we could have this," she said softly. "A real relationship, genuine support." "Neither did I admitted. "But I'm grateful we found our way here." "Me too," she said, hugging me tightly. "Judge Reed." I laughed at her use of my title now, an affectionate acknowledgement rather than a source of tension. "Go enjoy Bali Marketing Director Palmer." As I watched her join Jacob for their departure, I reflected on the journey we had taken. One word spoken at a dinner table had shattered years of misunderstanding, creating space for truth and healing. The process had been painful at times, requiring all of us to confront uncomfortable patterns and take responsibility for our contributions to the family dynamic. Yet the result was freedom. Freedom from the weight of misperception, from the constant strain of maintaining facades, from the limitation of being seen as less than we truly were. In finding the courage to stand in our truth, we had discovered the possibility of authentic connection. In my courtroom, I often witness people at their worst moments, trapped in conflicts that seem insurmountable. My role is to apply the law fairly, while recognizing the humanity of those before me. What I have learned both on the bench and in my personal life is that truth, however difficult, creates the foundation for resolution. We cannot solve problems we refuse to acknowledge or heal wounds we deny exist. The journey with my sister taught me that standing in your truth is not about vindication or forcing others to recognize your worth. It is about creating space for authentic connection based on who you really are, not who others perceive you to be. Sometimes that truth can be expressed in a single word, but its ripples can transform relationships in ways you never imagined possible. Have you ever had to set the record straight with someone who misunderstood or underestimated you? How did you handle that situation? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing in their truth can lead to healing and new beginnings. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, you are the ultimate judge of your own worth, not anyone else.